this is Shiting welcoming you to Backstage, the life behind the music. This is an online series of conversations with pianists, an exploration of their remarkable artistic lives as performers, teachers, and advocates for music. Through talking, I hope to shed some light on their process, to get a glimpse into some of their music making, the real work that takes place before they or their students step out onto the stage. Great. Thank you so much for giving me your time, Professor Tutunov. I'm very interested to learn about piano series and your life as a musician and your stories. So I was wondering if you could start by telling me a little bit about your background. I was very interested in learning that you were recognized as a prodigy by the Russian government, and then you were enrolled in the Moscow Conservatory at age 6. What was that like?
First off, I'm very honored to be a part of your project, which I think is a fantastic project, a great idea. I am humbled and honored. And I don't know, it's probably an overstatement to see that I was recognized as a prodigy, but what I would like to share, yes, I had started when I was probably 4, and first my teacher just had me move to the music and get an appreciation for music and show pictures of Baroque instruments and asked me to just encouraged me to like it, which I think is very important. But then, uh, uh, because I lived about 500 miles away from Moscow, my teacher, when I turned 6, she said I should try and go and enter. And my mom said that if I do a good job, she would take me to a zoo. And of course, I was very excited about it. So I did my best to do a good job. I had to play a program, and then they checked my pitch and then had me sing a song, the usual thing, the rhythm. But then they called me to the table, and there were 7 people sitting there, mostly this old men and women, and looking friendly but a little official, or I remember. And they all like looked at my hands and examined my hands. And turns out that 200 kids tried out that year, and they accepted 3. Of course, I didn't have any way of knowing it, so I didn't get even proud because of that, which is another important thing. So this school was called School for Specially Gifted Children, but the year I entered, it was renamed to the Central Music School of Moscow Conservatory. So I could think of a prep school in Juilliard. I could think of several, very few, unfortunately, very few in this country, but not any of them quite like what we had in Moscow and actually in every major city of Soviet Union. We're talking 16 schools that were modeled after our school, where we were learning all of the other general education disciplines as well. And 80 of the kids out of roughly 300 stayed in the dorms or actually a boarding school because we were little. So I was not even 7 when the whole thing started. And, you know, our ear training teacher is Kabelievsky, and our eurythmics teacher is somebody who studied with Dalcroze and Karl Orff. Um, our sister school was the similar school of the Bolshoi Theater, so we mingled with ballerinas, and would go and attend their performances and classes. Um, the evenings, because it was walk distance to uh, both Bolshoi Great Hall of Moscow Conservatory, Rachmaninoff Hall, Tchaikovsky Hall, 2 of the many opera theaters, um, pretty much I would say every other evening we were at an actual concert with the actual somebody great. So I've seen Horowitz live, of course, all the Richter's concerts, Gilel's concert. It was normal. Our favorite pastime would be to gather around an open score of an opera. And so some kids would sing, some would bring their instruments and play out of the open score. We would just read through the opera, and we thought everybody was like that in the whole world. We didn't feel special. So um, I think that was extremely lucky. Um, and I kind of wish that there was something like that in the States. Maybe when I grow up, I work on something like that. We actually reported to the Ministry of Culture rather than the Ministry of Education. And of course, how should I say, it was not as intense in geometry and math and physics, especially the people who were already touring with the symphony orchestras and winning competitions, at the fourth or sixth grade. Um, every year we had to prove that we are worthy of remaining
Mhm.
at that school. And so there was a little bit of a turnaround. Only a few people made it from K through, it was 11 grades, but you graduate basically with a bachelor's of music and you're barely 18. So that was a great head start. And investing, oh, and everything was paid for too. I forgot to mention that. Um, so if there's some way to model something like this in the States, that would do great things, I think, for the music.
Mhm.
They had similar schools for figure skaters and gymnasts and anybody who showed any promise.
Mhm.
So was probably more than you asked for. So, but that was my initial upbringing. 13 years in Moscow with the greatest teachers, soaking up the music. We started foreign languages in the second grade. English is not my first foreign language. Actually, I studied German first, and of course Italian because we need Italian.
Yeah, it seems like in China, musical education is also valued very much, very highly. Like I also traveled a couple hundred miles to go live in Chengdu, away from my home, since I was 12. But it's not nothing like Moscow Conservatory that we didn't have uh, a lot of great exposures. So that's why when you came, I was very struck. I remember that's probably like what 15 years ago that I I know, because this is my 10th year in the States, studying in the States.
This is phenomenal because I remember you in Chengdu during my frequent visits to the conservatory, and I remember being inspired by how high the level was, how
Yeah.
serious students were. It's really a great. But again, you had the school, and then you had the conservatory, and you had the dorms and the boarding school and the cafeteria. So very much, I think, from my observations, the old guard they spoke Russian because they were often trained in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But the younger generation of my colleagues spoke English or German because they went and studied in America or Europe or French. And that um, fusion, I think, is very indicative because the quality started to just go so fast up and up and up. During my visits, I've been to China probably over 20 times by now, and I still see a growing quality and growing interest and a growing level. So you are doing, or they are doing something right.
Yes.
And I'm not surprised to see you being so successful as a product of this great education.
Yes, I'm lucky to be in a very good conservatory. And I want to ask, you were put in music in a very young age. I was wondering if there's any particular experience that struck you, any formative experience to you as a musician, anything that comes to mind?
It's an excellent question, and there's no single answer because even if I mention one name, then other instrumental people in my life would get mad. Also, I must say that with age, I noticed that life and life experiences, even aside from the music, um, will change the way you think and feel about music. What I regret uh, is that only later did I realize that staying in touch with my teachers for as long as I live, as they are alive, um, is the most valuable source of information. They still have a lot to tell, uh, and I still continue a relationship with the mentors uh, that are around, including the one at North Texas, Joseph Panowitz, who I still am in touch, and if I have some important concert, I ask to play for him. And there are some very special people in my life. Um, like I said, when I was growing up, the experiences you soak up uh, in your youth are formative. And one can argue that it's easier now with so much music available on YouTube and other sources, but it's just not the same. Still, there's something about live performances that I remember in my lessons. I talk about this pianist that I swear I was hearing him live and he managed to make a crescendo on one note. And people just look at me and say, that's impossible. I say, well, don't go and study physics if you don't think it's possible. Because in music, everything's possible. I would say um, it's important to maintain a lifelong contact with your teachers and mentors and people who you trust artistically and learn continuously. There's one other thing, and to sum it up, it's you never know who is in the audience. So I learned early on, but that you could be in the smallest place, and there could be somebody that would change your life. Um, Maybe over a cup of tea. Uh, there was a gentleman that popped up out of nowhere. I was warming up, preparing for the performance of the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto, and he was just standing there. And I stopped at the rehearsal, and I said, "Can I help you?" And he said something to the effect, "Sergei would release the pedal a little bit later, maybe two in a cadenza." And I said, "Sergei who?" He said, "Rachmaninoff." And so it turns out that he was a close associate, a first student, and then um, he was Dr. Raymond Foote. And he had stories. He graduated from Juilliard in 1932, and then he moved to the West Coast and was looking for a good teacher. And there happened to be Sergei Rachmaninoff, right? Well, he took a train for lessons, and then he asked why Rachmaninoff never smiled, and Rachmaninoff said, "Well, why smile with students? With friends, of course I smile." And then he said, "Oh, I so wish I was your friend." And he said, "Come to my barbecue. You meet my wife, my sister." So he started going to his house. He never wrote a book, but uh, you never know who you meet in the audience because he gave me a whole new perspective on the Russian music. Being in the heart of, I drove to Nevada to meet and have tea with this man. He he lived a long life. He and his wife of 64 years, um, both also, I would say, enriched me and my teaching and my appreciation of music a great deal. I think I know more about old school.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's not every day in life that you get to meet someone with amazing stories like like
But that could happen any day, and you should be open and prepared for it. Wherever you travel, always keep your radar up, searching.
yeah, and then also be prepared. Don't sound like a train wreck. Yeah. You just mentioned that you have a performance coming up this evening, and I was wondering, as a very active performer and also a full-time professor, how do you balance a teaching full-time and practicing and performing?
Another excellent question and a tough one. I know many of my colleagues who, to stay honest and keep at the level, would give up one for the other.
Mhm.
And I respect those choices. I would say, well, for example, Leon Fleischer, not voluntarily did he give up performing, but what made him a great teacher and musician was he was forced to verbalize
Mhm.
a nonverbal concept for a number of years. And the clarity of a concept is super important and essential. I think the student has a right to stop at any point during the lesson and say, and why do you want me to do this? And if the teacher cannot tell why, um, then he or she is not doing a good job. Um, and for that, especially knowing that English is not my first language, I need to maintain my technique, I feel. So I don't want to be another type of teacher at the like so teacher who could play anything and say, like so. That's the other extreme. But staying in the middle as much as you can is, I think, what I strive for and thrive on. I want to be a role model for the students. I want them to see that I take every public performance seriously, and yet that I'm dedicated to them. It's harder for planning and gives me a reason when students come to the lesson and say, this week was very busy, so I didn't get much practice in that. I just smile and I say, you have no idea what busy is, but you get to practice being busy, organized, planning ahead from very early age. Because an 8-year-old complains about being busy, an 18-year-old complains about being busy, and 28, and somebody, um, and you just look back and think, I had so much time and I wasted so much time. So balancing this helps me be a better teacher, I think, and a better role model. I hope that makes sense. There's some possessive thing. I noticed that, and people know I'm crazy, but sometimes I avoid teaching what I'm about to perform because somehow one robs off the other and not necessarily in good way. I give my magic and then I lose it for my own performance. Or if it's a concerto and I play orchestra part, then I go and play the solo part and my brain has the orchestra part, that gets confusing. So I have to also be vigilant on that matter. But I do believe that I draw uh, inspiration from teaching for my performing and vice versa.
Mhm. Yes. I also read that you have made some recordings over the years of lesser known works by various composers like Tchaikovsky and etc. And can you tell me a little about the process and why did you choose those repertoire and program?
Well, I could give you a joke and say, who needs another Rachmaninoff second recording? You know, However, it's harder to score a gig if it's a concerto of a lesser known composer because the audience won't come necessarily. So it needs to be good music, and that's first and foremost. Then, often in an interview, people say, "Who's your favorite composer?" I say, if I give you a first name, the others will get mad at me because they're all watching. But if you want a serious answer, I think quality comes first, and off the beaten path repertoire. There's some musicians that will only program the war horses, the most famous things,
Mhm.
and there are musicians who do the opposite. Um, First and foremost, it has to be good music.
Mhm.
So, if anybody who is still a student at the university, at the conservatory, is watching this, network, network, network. Commission the music from your fellow students of composition. Maybe they will become the next leading figure in the world uh, composers, list. You never know. Um, but you have to also establish yourself as a champion. There is a concerto number one by Tchaikovsky, but there's also concerto number two, concerto number three, fantasy, concert fantasy. There are also works of great interest by great composers that are often overlooked.
Mhm.
The joke is, Saint-Saëns wrote two concertos, number two and number five. Well, you understand where I'm getting at. Turns out Aaron Copland has a fantastic piano concerto that has a jazz elements. It was written a few blocks from Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue, at the same time. So this, I learned the concerto. There's only three recordings in existence. And because they're both on the short side, I would approach conductors and I say Rhapsody in Blue and Copland Concerto, Gershwin Jazz and Copland Jazz. And I got lucky several times because it was interesting program,
Yeah.
and people would come.
Mhm.
Very different, very great, very similar. Um, Peter Sacco was a Korean War veteran who educated at Eastman as a vocalist and discovered that he was a composer. Wrote an excellent concerto and with no chance to perform. Um, so I had to do it. I just had to do it because I felt strongly. And there was also this Lev Abeliovich composer in Belarus, and because of the politics and other factors, just not a lot of performances. And
Mhm.
so I've recorded 5 CDs with his music on the Altarus Records label,
Mhm.
and 3 violin sonatas, 2 books of frescoes, 3 piano sonatas, piano concerto, piano trio, art songs. Turns out the man was writing into his work desk and rarely published. I had to do something about it. He was still alive when I learned his third sonata, but by the time, being a student, I took my time to learn it. And then I knocked on his door, and he was too weak to put a tie on, and he would not see people without, a tie on, the old school.
Mhm.
So he never coached me in the sonata, but I just vowed to get his music more known.
Mhm.
And once there was a performance, um, and somebody picked up this music, and they used it for a documentary which later received an Emmy award.
Mhm.
And I was on the soundtrack because there was no other recording. Therefore, there was no better recording. And so you never know who's an audience, and you never know what strikes people. It's deeply personal music, and I think it's great. It's all over YouTube, and I don't care. Actually, I'm very proud.
I I think it's very good to see that. I think these days there's a push for representing underrepresented composers, like female composers, African American composers. It's great. I have came to know some very interesting compositions by Lily Boulanger because a couple of my studio mates are playing that. It's beautiful. I did not know that before. So I think it's
Fascinating,
definitely.
fascinating figure. Too
Mhm.
short a life, unfortunately, but I have done a few violin piano works by Lily Boulanger. Of course, I'm very proud she took Prix de Rome off Ravel's hands, all the scandal stories. Um, it's fascinating and absolutely true. Life is too short, perhaps, to hear another rendition of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. Why not listen to something that was sitting and waiting for us for 150 years? I I agree with you absolutely. This is very true.
Okay, so now this question is going to be a little controversial. It's about competitions. You are a frequent adjudicator of some very big, prestigious competitions like the Seattle International Piano Competition. And what is your view on competitions? I know that the Seattle competition is a little different because everything is behind the screen. It's sort of like a orchestral auditions. They do that. They will sit behind the screen, and so your gender is not revealed and who you are is not revealed. I think that's more fair, for sure.
In the later editions, Seattle International Piano Festival and Competition even went even farther. They had a runner rag to the pianist, so if somebody's wearing heels, the judges could not even hear any hints or clues. And again, it's a tough question, uh, but there are competitions that I think um, are wonderful. And I also think that competitions are helpful to launch somebody's career. However, so 100 people go to compete. One wins and 99 go home with nothing. That could not be healthy. All these rejections, all politics, all uh, subjective things that sometimes happen. And then there are too many competitions. How does one competition, there's a competition amongst competitions, how to get ahead. So we are almost in a crisis situation in that regard. There is a third thing, and that is as a winner of a competition, you receive some money, monetary reward, and perhaps a couple of gigs. Um, Even a big competition will get you on a circuit for 2, 3, 4 years until the next winners are ready to be publicized. And what happened to the people who won and then they're no longer in demand because they depended on that particular competition? Can't blame the competition, can't blame the performer, can't blame the luck. Then perhaps invest in competitions and the preparation for the competitions. The great ones require 3, 4 years of solid preparation, focused preparation. During the formative years of the pianist, and sometimes the competition is monographic, then this pianist becomes a narrow Franz Liszt specialist. I mean, it's still very broad, but the problem that I see, let's say you receive $25,000, which is huge for a young person, but somebody who's your classmate and didn't enter this competition invested in scholarship auditions and enter the prestigious college on the full ride, which essentially means $45,000, $50,000 a year for 4 years. Do the math. They received a different kind of a prize, which is $200,000 roughly. Um, and then you think, did you invest in the right thing? Because you practiced, you worked with the excellent teacher, and you have an opportunity now to focus on your practicing because your uh, tuition is paid for. And maybe that should be more of a focus for young people, because sometimes going to a good school for a good cause um, is more rewarding, and you're better, more well-rounded of a musician and a pianist who's not just set the course on one competition and then didn't make it to the final round. It is detrimental, I think, occasionally in the psychological state. Um, there's another problem I've seen, and that is when somebody who's won a major competition and starts entering small regional competitions, which is a money making now, but also depriving all the young and aspiring, less experienced talents of their rewards. Um, I have not seen it often, but sometimes I'm thinking, what's this person doing in a smaller competition? You know, they don't belong here. Um, however, I love competitions. Why? As a judge, I go and I get inspired because that gives me hope. The level of performance, I'm so glad I don't have to start my career now and enter competitions on the other side. But also to those who enter competitions, I want to say the judges are people too. And personally, I don't sit and count wrong notes. I look for some individuality because I miss the times um, when I listen to the old masters and the old recordings, and you don't have to read the label to know who's playing. And when people come with their understanding of music, with their strong idea, conviction, they inspire me to no end. And they would inevitably rise to the top of my rankings. And I think my colleagues too will hear a true character and individuality. Don't worry about the wrong notes. I forgive, I forgive 10 per person.
So do not ever play love and run notes. You started the Tutunov piano concert series, and I was wondering what's the motivation behind starting the series and how it came to be.
Um, Excellent question. And I gave praise to YouTube and Google for sharing the music, but it's not the same as the live performance. You can't um, you can't compare. There's this moment of sharing right there. Some magic happens, and again, we already established I'm crazy, but um, I'm proud of it too. So, bringing the music to a smaller, more remote region with the top-notch performers. We had fantastic names grace us um, with their presence and glorious programs in close to 10 years of our existence. Um, Also, the availability of music broadly, you see, one doesn't need to travel to New York to hear a phenomenal performance because New York can come and present a performance right here in Ashland, Oregon, at our campus. We are very proud of our choice of pianos uh, through the generosity of our donors. Um, but the concert series, I encourage everybody to do that. There were 8 supporters who just chipped in this seed money. I'm thinking it could have been $300, $500 each. And that's what we started with.
Mm.
We have a decent support now, and I'm very grateful to our sponsors, but most of the money comes from ticket sales because people come and they want to experience this music, and that is my best reward. The irony of it, well, it's not really the irony, it's tangentially related. But I looked at the wonderful roster of people you have already interviewed in your project, which again, I think is a great idea. I wish there were more, and I know you will have more. But it's interesting that many of the people interviewed came or grew up or educated on the West Coast and then migrated east. And I migrated and took the place where their stomping grounds were. So Northern California, Southern Oregon, and I just find the great inspiration. I believe that people should move around and spread the ideas because they cultivate and generate ideas and they need to share. And these concerts help us see and compare different ways of playing from different schools. And there are discussions uh, after the concert that are also very inspirational and educational.
Mhm. Yes, that's a great thing. We also have something similar called the University Musical Society, and then they bring in a lot of very famous, and then they also bring in like Berlin Philharmonic and Cleveland Orchestra. So they have a huge support, and it's wonderful for us to be in a small town, but still hearing wonderful music, wonderful live music. And I hope we can go back to that pretty soon, hopefully.
I'm ready. I'm so ready. I know it's coming.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your wonderful talks on about music and about your background. And I'm getting a lot of very good advice from you. And then I hope best of luck for your performance tonight.
Thank you. I
And I
need it.
hope we see you in person sometime very soon.
I would like that a lot. And best of luck to you and your series and your career. Thank you for having me and have a great day.